there's something that a lot of people in Overwatch struggle with, and that is communication. Whether it's on the team level, like something like Overwatch League, well, ex Overwatch League, or even contenders teams, or even World Cup teams, or if it's just as simple as your silver comp game. A lot of people always ask comms, like what type, how do you communicate in this game? And it's something that not everyone understands to like a great deal. Like, yes, you probably heard of alt tracking, you probably heard of like just communicating, calling a target, something simple like that. But when you really look at it, if you really want to perform well as an individual or as a team, you want to be able to understand and know exactly what you're doing when it comes to communication. So this is primarily going to be geared toward Overwatch communication, but I feel that the first aspect of this video will be going over something that a lot of games can utilize, which is something that's going to be called basic communication. So basic comms is an aspect of the game where you want to look into just what are you seeing around you, what's going on around you, meaning does the enemy is the enemy flanking to the left? Are they going right? Where are they? What is their movement patterns? We want to recognize movement patterns in the enemy and communicate that and state what they are, as well as ability usage. Ability usage is extremely important when it comes to this game. Especially if like you see an Ana use Sleep, a Kiriko use Suzu, it's primarily you're going to hear these comms come from the supports or the tanks because they have the most important game-changing utility, like Anti, like Suzu. Those can make differences in fights. They could also make differences for DPS, like if Tracer has no recall, Sojourn no slide, Widow no grapple, even something like that. The team needs to know if that's it exists, because then that changes what the target of the fight is. In some case scenarios. So in the basics, those are the two that you really want to look for. And then when you want to get a little bit more advanced, you want to look to communicate whether or not you evolve. Your ultimates. Ultimates, as well as the enemy ultimates. You want to make sure that your team knows what you have, not just you and your team has, as well as what you believe the enemy team has, which comes to ult tracking, which we'll get a little bit more in depth with a little later on. But if you can work on it in the more competitive sense, like comp season, as a solo player or duo player, that would be more important for you to just be able to recognize as basic comms. But in the team aspect, we'll get into more ult tracking, explaining how that should work going forward. But you want to make sure that your team knows what your team has on ults on deck, and what the enemy team has, what ults the enemy team has up on deck. These are very important for your team to know, because this is, yes, it may feel like a fun, fast-paced game, but communicating your way through it, just even communicating these four and a couple other aspects of this game, makes this game seem less confusing in the middle of the fight, and it allows you to understand what's going on around you and assist you in getting to that next rank that you want to hit, or next win that you're looking to get as a team. So something that people normally miss out on is, yes, movement patterns, but also their own movement patterns. This is important to communicate. It's something that I feel a lot of people also just forget to do. Specifically flankers like Genjis and Tracers, or even Sombras. They just don't communicate when and where they're moving to, because your team needs to know, or would like to know, when you're taking an off angle. This allows them to see, okay, if we have a Tracer on the left side of this, Tracer's flanking the left, maybe we could try to coerce them into pincering them in collapsing in on them at this one point in the map. This will allow your team to win more fights, instead of you going off on the left side, ending up in a 1v1 with another Tracer, and your team's questioning, where the fuck is my Tracer right now? and just having zero idea where you went, at least if you communicated what your movement patterns are, if they're unusual in some way, so communicate that so your team doesn't feel confused and not really know what the fuck's going on with you. So in the sense that yes, this is basic communication. A lot of these can be related to other games, such as like Valorant. You can, well, it's a little bit easier to do in other games like Valorant, but even still, like, you want to communicate your movement patterns, and as well as enemy movement patterns, ability usage that you see. These all come into play in other video games, not just Overwatch. That's why this is under the topic of basic comms. So if we look at other forms of communication, we have the next one, which is going to become, these next ones are going to come more into like the team aspect of the game, where like if you're on a contenders team, if you're on a college team, high school team, even a scrim team, they want to know these types of communications. These are what's important to the game. It's what's also very important. Like, even if you are a solo comp player, it's still important for you to understand how these forms of communication work. So the first one up would be ult tracking. This is obviously, as I mentioned prior, it's tracking the enemy's ults. It's as basic as it sounds in that sense. It's not super complex. However, it's very vital that you understand how it works, because it's not easy to do off start. Because it requires you to think about what the enemy is doing and how much impact they've had in the fight. Recognizing how much impact they've had in the fight allows you to see and think what ults they would have coming up next. Meaning you need to, early on in the fight, you need to be able to recognize, okay, sometimes you'll be able to look at the damage numbers or healing numbers and say, okay, this Ana definitely has nano by now. Ryan definitely has shatter. A lot of these ults, you'll know that, okay, after one fight, they already have it. Like shatter. A lot of the times, a Reinhardt will have shatter after first fight. Or even get it mid first fight, depending on how long the fight lasts. You want to make sure that you're able to recognize that. And then at that point, it just comes as simple as, I can recognize how many ults they have and what ults they have. I just have to say this out loud. So when it comes to the team aspect, like I mentioned, it needs to be fast. It needs to be quick. It needs to be the first thing said. And this is because this is the primary building block that sets up your team for your next fight plan, which we'll get into in a little bit. The ult tracking sets up the rest of your team's comms in order to allow your team to understand what they need to do going forward and how they need to take the next fight. So it needs to be fast, needs to be quick, and needs to be first. So if we were to look at it, I'll get into the ladder of how all of these comms should be played out in a bit. But for now, just recognize that ult tracking needs to be the first thing that comes out. So when it comes to ult tracking, I hear some people sometimes saying, like, yes, they're understanding how ult tracking works, but they're going a little bit too in-depth with it. They're trying to get like specific numbers, specific percentage numbers, when you really just don't need to do that realistically, because you want to keep with this aspect of be quick. It just needs to be fast, because you don't want to waste a lot of time on it. So you don't need to communicate like Ana's at 20%, Ryan's at 90. All you really need to do is state whether it's had, meaning they have the ult, whether it's close, or if they don't have it. These are the only three things that need to be communicated. And when I say close, I mean only communicate it if you think that they have the chance of getting it in the next fight, or in the fight that's about to happen, like the next fight. So these had ults and these close ults are the things that you want to watch out for. And the way you know if they don't have an ult is if they just used it, if they just made a character swap, or obviously if it's the start of a new round in some way, or the start of a match. And something that, last thing, something that a lot of people, when it comes to ult tracking, just don't completely know, and what actually costs a lot of time, is them thinking. Because yes, you'll recognize some ults, like you'll see a pulse bomb has come out, but you sometimes won't recognize that pulse bomb came out, and you will spend a couple seconds thinking, did they use pulse? And when you just don't need to, if you really don't know, just ask your team. Ask your team if they saw. If they saw the ult, there's more than a likely chance someone saw that pulse bomb come out in some way, shape, or form, because you definitely didn't misclick it. Most likely didn't misclick it on in spawn. So your team also has information that you don't, which is why communication is very important in a 5v5 game like Overwatch. There's nothing wrong with asking your team, and your team would probably be more happy at you, or yeah, they'd probably be more happy that you asked them to communicate, asked them to clarify what ults the enemy team has, versus you wasting an entire minute of their time and possibly missing out on a fight because you can't understand. You spent way too long thinking about what ults were coming up. For ult tracking, that's about all I have as of right now, because it's honestly a fairly basic thing. So we've gone over basic comms and ult tracking now. So let's get into the next aspect, which would be target calling. This is going to get more into the fight planning part of the game, and this is going to be what needs to kind of happen in the middle of the fight. What needs to be going on while the fight is happening, and even a little bit before the fight is happening. Kind of more what your team wants to recognize based on what the enemy is running, and what your team is running. Looking at the compositions and seeing, okay, this is our target going into this fight. So it is as basic as it sounds, similar to ult tracking. What are we looking for? What are we looking to kill? Kill/pressure. This is something that a lot of teams also mess up. Kill and pressure, the differences between these, because it does make a difference as to what you're looking to do. So when a player is calling a target, they'll normally call just the target, whether like tracer 1, tracer 1, tracer 1, on a low, on a killable, something in that sense. And yes, that's just a good target call. That's a good target call when it comes to just basic communication, when it comes to this aspect of comms. But what we want to look at is how can we target call that benefits our team. And this is going to go more into the, again, like I said, for ult tracking, target or team play aspect for the people that want to compete at a level that is in a 5v5 aspect of this game, and not just in the competitive aspect. So first, we got to be able to recognize what's kill/pressure. When we're looking to kill, it's the same as a normal call, aka Ana 1, look at Ana, just simply saying their name and hoping that your team looks at them. That's basically means let's look to kill this person. But when I say pressure, we want to make sure that our team knows, why are we looking at this target? Why do we want to look at this Ana? Are we looking to force out nade? Are we looking to force out anti? Or has she already used both of those? Oh wait, anti and nade are the same thing. Or she already used both of her util and she is killable. So recognizing that we want to look at the Ana for pressure would be calling something like, let's look to force out pressure Ana for sleep so we can have our Doom dive in. Something like that. Or even telling Doom to soft dive Ana so we can try to bait out sleep and then look for the hard dive on the kill. There's something recognizing that in communicating that to your team is much better than just saying look at Ana, look at Ana, look at Ana repeatedly. It'll make the difference in the fight if you and your team can both understand that while the fight is happening. And it goes the same with every other character and every other util in the game. So just being able to recognize that. Yes, target calling is important, but it is as simple as recognizing the difference between pressure and kills. This is extremely important when it comes to target calling, because majority of the time a target being called is looking for the kill and not recognizing why. Gotta ask, you must ask why, and not like ask the team in this sense for ult tracking, more in the ask yourself, why are we looking at this target? It's why? Just why do we want to look at the Ana? Do we want to look to kill, or do we want to look to pressure out abilities? Okay, so going into the next aspects, we have maybe 3 more aspects to cover of communication, and now these are going to be more in the point of use of ults. So these next 3 aspects are something that are less commonly known in the community of Overwatch, and that would be use of ults, map control, and what is the enemy's plan. So we'll start with use of ults. This is something that you can normally do. This is your pre-fight plan in a sense. Kind of like, what do you want to do after you hear the enemy's ults? Like, okay, what are we gonna look to use? Like, let's say the ult tracker says they have a nanovisor. They're probably gonna nanovisor next fight, and we have trans up. So we could look to say, we could save trans for nanovisor, or say beat for nanovisor, something like that, and be just that. That's all we want to look to use. We don't want to, because we know they're gonna try to go first. So let's just try to go second and bait out those ults, and then we could look to engage using probably May Freeze or something like that, whatever your team comp is running. So what we want to do is, it's just as simple as, what ults are we using? What ults are we using? Just ask this question. You could even ask your team, what ults do we want to use this fight? Normally, when it comes to the team sense, you want to kind of more designate someone to have this kind of plan. Sometimes it's the tank, sometimes it's the support. It's whoever the team feels most comfortable with that the team can confidently say this player can come up with a good ult use plan for us, because this is also very important, because this controls how we use our ult economy. Trying not to do more than 2 to maybe 3 ults a fight. 3 if they pop more of their ults. 2 if we are the only ones ulting. So we just want to be able to recognize what ults we want to use, and how we want to use them, and when. What, how, and when are very important when it comes to using ults. Because everyone in this game should, if you're playing that character, whether it's in comp or it's in a team game, you should understand how your ult works. So, but sometimes you don't always play it at the right time. So having someone inform you of, like, okay, we could look to either combo ult, or you could look to you spawn an opportunity to use it here. We're gonna use it this fight. Or if we don't want to use this ult here because it's not a great part of the map, or it's what the enemy has up is not really going to be a good idea for us to use it. Or if we want to use it to bait out the enemy ults that we think that they might have, then you have to be thinking, or the use of ult guy has to be thinking of, okay, we want to be using that to do this. Like, let's use Blade to bait out trans, because Blade isn't really good right now. So let's use Blade to bait out trans, so we can then go in and use one of our better ults, like OC, or Overclock, for someone that doesn't know what that means. Assuming you're running something like that. You want to be able to recognize why we are using the ult. And when. It feels just like a second grade English lesson, what, why, when, where, who, what, when, or whatever, asking all these questions. But when it comes to this kind of communication, it is very important to know what ults we want to use, because we don't want to overall and we don't want to underall, because teams that don't communicate will tend to overall at times, and some teams will even tend to underall because they think that because of the lack of communication, they didn't think that they could use their ult here and something like that. And then we want to communicate why. I've already stated multiple reasons to why: to bait out other ults, to play early, to play second, to apply pressure onto this one character, and when we want to use our ults for an emergency, whether they or when they use their ults, or if we want to play early, we that would be another when. The when and why go together. The what goes together. All three of these go together and play into how your team is going to play this next fight. Yes, and there, you also don't have to play ults. You don't always have to use. You don't always need to communicate that you want to use ults. You could just say dry fight. Let's look to dry fight this. Let's look to dry fight here. Or if you don't have ults, let's say we're gonna play the long fight here and look to just play more patient and play more defensive until we get something online, or if they pop something, we could look to be aggro afterwards, after it's over. You don't always have to ult. Okay. So up next, we could get into map control. Probably, I think something that players and teams understand, but I don't think they completely understand how to communicate it well a lot of the times. I think that makes sense. So map control, we've all heard it before, but it's important to understand how to play it mechanically, but it's also important to know how to communicate map control. This goes back to the basic comms that I was stating about looking at where the enemy is, communicating where the enemy is, and communicating what you're doing movement wise. That's the basics of what this is when you get more in detail. So when you really look at it, it's ask your team, how and where do we want to control? Control the map. How and where do you want to control that map? No matter what map it is, whether it's Dorado or whether it's Antarctic Peninsula. How do we want to control it, and where do we want to be in order to enable that how? So you also have to look at what composition you're running for this aspect as well. Because if you're running a Ryan Lucio rush comp, you don't want to be holding the bridge on circuit. You don't want to be on first point circuit. You don't want to be looking to do that because your team's not going to benefit the most out of that. You'd be better off holding that frontal corner closer to their spawn doors. You have to think and this job normally goes to the tank, map control, because they're normally the in-game leader, but they also are where your team needs to base around, because of where they position determines where your team is allowed to position, because again, there's only one tank in Overwatch 2. The team needs to know where we want to position and how we want to do that. So it is that simple. It is actually as simple as just asking this question: how and where do we want to control, based off the enemy comps. Looking at these two things, it just how and where. Just how and where. Okay, up next. Last part of the basic forms of communication, or of how to communicate in Overwatch. Enemy plans. Enemy plans. This is probably the most difficult out of the 6 that we've gone over tonight. What is the enemy plan to do? It's also, like I've said for everything else, that simple. What do they plan to do? This could go right after ult tracking. What does the enemy plan to use? What ult is the enemy going to use? What ults are they going to use? Where do they want to hold? Thinking about all 5 of the other aspects of the game, or of the communication that we just mentioned, and putting it into what is the enemy thinking? What are they thinking about? Assuming they understand all of these aspects of comms as well. How would they want to control the map? Where would they want to control the map? What ults do they want to use? What ults do they think we want to use? Just kind of counter thinking of what the enemy is going to do because of what we're looking at, what we've looked at so far in this video. Is the enemy playing a Sigma poke on circuit? So they're going to want to hold far and they're going to want to keep us at a distance. Okay, they have visor up, or no, they have vision up from, let's say they have a Widowmaker. They have vision. Okay, they're they're going to probably pop vision this fight. So let's just look to be a little bit more patient and watch our heads and listen out for that noise. Just communicate how does the enemy want to play. You look at their comp. You see they have a Mei and a Rhine on their team. To communicate with your team, okay, they're going to look to wall us off and then just have that Rhine go in swinging. Your team needs to know that. Your team would like to know that. I mean, they may realize it subconsciously, but it's better for your team to consciously be aware in case there's that one person that doesn't understand exactly what the enemy's plan is or what the enemy's comp is. Communicate what ults they want to use. Communicate how they want to play. It's all in that kind of scary mindset of just planning the enemy. And then if you also look at just how basic war plans work, the team is the enemy team, or the enemy of nation or group is, we always want to know what do we think that they're going to be doing, like based on what we know about what they have in the area. What do we think they're going to do is what goes on in war. And then they're thinking the same thing about what are we going to do. It just keeps on. It's always this back and forth in that you always want to have the upper plan. The more that you can think and predict on what the enemy is doing, the better off you're going to be in the fight going forward. So now, how does all of this play in? So a lot of teams put a lot of this communication on the tank. I'm going to say you don't have to do that. Since we went over 6 things tonight, there's only 5 that are important for your team to understand. Some teams will put majority on the tank, some will put it on spread it out, and some won't do it at all. So number 1, we could start with basic comms. Actually, basic comms are something that everyone should know. Everyone on the team should know how to do basic comms, because that's always important. Communicating what you're doing, communicating what you see used, ability-wise, ult-wise, communicating enemy positioning, anything like that. Well, we already went over in the basic comm section. We want to communicate that. So that's happening pre, pit, mid, and post-fight. But when we are coming down to the pure fight plan of the comm aspect, we want to start with ult tracking. Ult tracking is the most important thing to go with. That's supposed to happen the second the fight ends, or the second the fight is visibly lost, and then as the team is resetting, whoever the designated ult tracker on the team, usually a support, goes in and does it. So once they speak, the next thing, that at least how I like to view it, is the enemy's plan. What is the enemy's plan? You want someone on your team to be able to recognize, okay, what I've mentioned above. What is the enemy going to do? Then, using that information, you want someone communicating what ults we want to use. What do we want to use? So now we know what ults they have and how they want to use them, as well as what they plan to do next fight. And then the use of ults person is going to utilize that information to say, okay, we could use this ult, this ult, this ult, use this for emergency, and whatnot, and let's not use this because I don't think it's going to be very necessary this fight. And now when you look at 4 and 5, these two go together. These two go kind of hand in hand. Target calling and map control. Because yes, you can communicate where you want to stand prior to the fight, but you have to look at the ebb and flow of the fight. Thinking about, okay, yes, we want to hold here off start, but what if they end up getting an advantage in some way? How are we going to maneuver, kite back, push in, or rotate in some way to give us the or to keep our advantage, or to at least make it a fair playing field if we're down? We want to be able to recognize that map control mid-fight as well as pre-fight. And then there's also target calling. This is something, again, also similar to map control, can be done pre-fight. Okay, let's look to pressure out this honor. Let's look to pick off this Widow early in some way. But even mid-fight, it's important because targets change, positions change. Everything in the fight changes because of the ebb and flow of this game. It's a continually changing game, and fights can last anywhere from 2 seconds with a team-wide diva ult to a minute and a half with just prolonged fights. And communication will make the difference. Make sure everyone is looking at what the target's doing, or for target calling. Make sure everyone's looking at that target. Make sure everyone's aware of what's going on, what needs to be happening in this game. Following these 6 aspects of communication. If a team is able to understand all 6 of these aspects and utilize them to the best of their abilities, they will be more successful than a team that cannot communicate well.